everybody. Peter Schiff. This is Monday, June 8th, 2009. Well, last couple of days we've had a little bit of a counter-trend rally in the dollar. Dollar index this morning traded above 81 intraday. You remember the lows last week, the dollar index got down in the 87s, I think, or 88s. And I don't think this is anything, material. No markets move in a straight line. They always follow a jagged path, and you have, moves ups and downs, and I think this is no exception. With the strength of the dollar, we've also seen some weakness in gold, weakness in oil. One market that hasn't been able to buck the trend is the bond market. The bond market has been weak the entire time. In fact, the yield on the 10-year Treasury hit a new high for this move. So that is a very, very weak market. If it couldn't even have a real counter-trend move simultaneous with the moves that we saw in the dollar and in the gold market. I don't know for sure whether or not these short-term moves have ended. I don't think there's much upside in the dollar from here. I still think the dollar's going lower. I don't think there's a lot of downside in gold from here. So I think investors should continue to look at these trends, the major trends, and look for opportunities to buy into any of these dips in commodities or gold and sell into a rally in the dollar. Now, looking at some of the news that we got today, I think it's very interesting and very troubling, although there is some hope here, that the Supreme Court might actually block the government's plan for Chrysler. You know, a good number of Chrysler's assets are basically being turned over to fiat. And some of the secured creditors have filed a lawsuit to prevent the transfer of assets to fiat because the creditors who are secured would rather sell the assets at a better price so that they can recover more money. Apparently, fiat is getting the assets for free, but in doing so, they're promising, not to lay off workers, or they're absorbing the ongoing losses from the operation, but they're not paying any money, which does nothing to help the creditors. So they filed a suit, and the Supreme Court has decided, at least for now, Ginsburg has signed an order to stay this pending further review. Now, hopefully, the Supreme Court will throw this whole thing out and uphold the rights of the creditors, because we don't want to have a precedent where the courts can simply throw out the rights of secured creditors. Now, what the government is arguing in their brief is that their interests don't matter, because even if this deal imposes losses or hardship on these creditors, that to block the deal and to force a legitimate bankruptcy would have even more hardships for everybody else, including the workers. Well, that's not the way it works. We don't want to have a system that says if you loan money to a company, they don't have to pay you back if other people suffer in the process. You can imagine, why would anybody want to loan money to an American company, particularly one that was in difficulty, if they couldn't find a secure way to lend money? If they were afraid that any kind of security they had for their loans would be set aside in bankruptcy in favor of some special interest that has some political clout. And, the real irony here is, on the one hand, you had creditors who loaned money on Wall Street, that loaned money to investment in commercial banks, who got completely bailed out. The governments, even when they let, like Bear Stearns go bankrupt or Lehman go bankrupt, the government made all the creditors whole. Now, why does the government make some creditors whole and then go to a situation like Chrysler, where creditors who are secured, who had assets that they could have sold to make themselves whole, now the government basically screws them. The government basically steals their collateral out from under them. So where's the due process of law, where you have certain favored individuals who are getting bailouts by the government, and then other individuals who are being denied due process, who are having collateral stolen away from them by the government? And all of this, it sends a very, very clear message to anyone who would potentially loan money to Americans, and that's don't do it. Don't risk it, because you might not get paid back, because our courts are not going to enforce these contracts. And remember, the creditor here in the Chrysler case is a pension fund for a state government. So if our Supreme Court, if we're willing to screw our own citizens, our own state governments, imagine how quickly we'd set aside the rights of foreign companies or foreign governments. So this is the precise wrong message. Now, I'm wondering to see what the Supreme Court ultimately does. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they throw this thing out. But most likely there will be enough political pressure borne on the Supreme Court, which again is supposed to be independent like the Fed, but I doubt that they will be, and see if they cave in and fall in line with this Chrysler bankruptcy and the way the government's handling it. Now, on another note, talking about our foreign creditors, there were elections over the weekend in Europe. And once again, the trend outside the United States is away from socialism, towards the candidates that represent less government and more free markets. It's obviously not pure free markets over there, but they're certainly moving in the right direction. Contrast that to the United States. We're the one major country that is still moving left, that is still trying to solve these problems with more government and bigger government. And, you know, I was on CNBC today. I'm sure the video will be up on YouTube. And this is the first time that Mark Haynes said he actually agreed with me. So maybe I've been rubbing off on him over the years. Who knows? But my opponent in this debate was trying to argue that the dollar was sound, that we never were going to have high inflation like Argentina, that there was no problem with our national debt. And all he's doing is, you know, he's making all these rosy assumptions and rosy scenario assumptions and accusing me of not being in command of the facts. Meanwhile, he's totally denying the facts and jumping to these erroneous conclusions. And, you know, the thing is, recently, Ben Bernanke in Congress mentioned that if it wasn't for all these government bailouts, right, if the Treasury and the Federal Reserve had not stepped in, by his own words, it would have been catastrophe. We averted catastrophe. Well, we didn't avert it. We just postponed it. I mean, I would like a lot of people to think about this for a minute. Now, I was out there predicting all this gloom and doom. And if the government hadn't done all these terrible things, we would have had the gloom and doom. But you know what? That would have been preferable to what we're going to have now. Because now, in order to bide our time, in order to postpone this pain, we simply exacerbate the underlying imbalances. And now we're staring at a much, much bigger economic crisis. And, you know, the last thing we want to do is to scare the people who we're going to need. We're going to need to rebuild this economy. We're going to need more factories. We're going to need foreign credit because we don't have our own credit. But where we need foreign capital flowing is not to the government, so the government can get bigger. We need private companies getting capital. We need businesses like a Chrysler that manufacture products. Only we want the manufacturing products profitably. But if we set the precedent of allowing the courts to tear up our contracts, and if we marginalize the rights of the creditors, then we're not going to get our hands on that capital because no one's going to want to supply it. Savings are going to go elsewhere. They're not going to go into the U.S. market. And we're going to need that because we don't have a lot of our own savings. And, you know, I am very much against foreigners and foreign governments in particular loaning money to our government. I think that's undermining our economy. But I want foreign citizens to loan money to American citizens, American businesses who will invest that capital in productive means, who will produce products and provide employment opportunities. But we're not going to have that if we chase them away. If we establish a precedent right now that says, hey, if there's a problem, screw the creditors, screw your contracts. We don't care if you've got security. We're going to set that aside because according to the government, the interest of other people matter more. The interest of the employees matter more, and they don't. And if this is going to be the case, companies that are in trouble, that have a lot of debt, will never be able to borrow more money, and the government's going to have to bail out everybody. Anyway, that's it for today. Don't forget to watch tomorrow on The Daily Show. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. It should be an interesting show. Until then, so long.